Hi, my name is Greg Vaughan, formerly known as Dan Gordon. You're welcome to FrConventions. Well, I was very fortunate because I was a part of the Aaron Spelling family from Spelling Entertainment, so I had just finished a TV series called Malibu Shores. And then from there, it spun off into 90210. So I was kind of like in the family, if you will, and then Aaron Spelling had called me and asked me to come into the office, and all the powers that be said, hey, we have a role and we would love to see if you would like to participate in it. And they told me, and I said, great. And I said, who am I working with? And they said, Shannen Doherty, Holly Marie Combs, and Alyssa Milano. And that's where Charm began. It was like, it was, 30 years ago. I mean, we're coming up on the 30-year anniversary, I guess. And I think I was in season 2 for 1998. It was great. I mean, it was like, it was tucked away in a it was in Los Angeles in a studio lot that I had driven by 100 times and never seen it, never realized where it was. And then, it was a beautiful thing and it was great. It was like I was very excited because I was joining, a very seasoned cast. And I was excited because I didn't know Holly or Alyssa, and I had just finished 90210, and Shannen was on there. So I was excited to work with her, kind of bringing that whole evolution together from the 90210 crew to her at Charmed. So it was fun. I mean, Brian and I, Brian Krause and then Dorian Gregory, and Brian and I, we became, acquainted really quickly, and we started playing chess a lot, So it was good. There was no like male ego. It was like the girls and not knowing where it was going to go, Dan was going to become mainstream. It was amazing, because then I was like, hey, you're this neighbor, but you're going to, supervise and guardianship your niece. And so having a young daughter was unfamiliar with me because I wasn't a father at the time. And so playing a role to a young girl was one thing. It was like, all right, this is going to be fun. But then interacting with the girls and seeing where the relationships were going to come into play. Leo was never a challenge for Dan. Dan was just like being himself, taking care of it. And I think originally, before they decided the Leo, Piper, and Dan storyline, it was supposed to be a Dan and Phoebe. So that was originally how it was going. And then Brad Kern, the executive producer, said, hey, we're going to change this dynamic. We're going to give you a love triangle to really make a different, a different storyline. Holly was easy. She's a pro. She's a childhood star. So her and Shannen had a lot in common growing up in the industry. So I was more drawn to not just being on the show and participating, I was a contributing factor. And it was a girls' show. So it was just like, being prepared and showing up, and then, letting it evolve. And the characters, they grew, and then Leo would white light into the room and then ruin everything. So then we had a butting of the minds, it was two male dominant guys, and envy, jealousy would take over. And more from a Leo perspective, he was like a little insecure with that. And so, but it was also what Piper's character wanted, more stability, presence, Brian and I, off camera, we were great, so on camera we were like, oh, okay, now when you punch me, and I'm like, I gotta win this fight, that. That's the way it's written. No, it's not. That's subtext. This could be anything. We could change it. I mean, give me an upper hand. Well, it's funny because the arc as it grew, and the relationship was growing, and then it concluded with me discovering their power. The character Dan, discovering it, and then it affected him physically, and then he aged, and then the emotional draw that Piper went through, and because Dan was suffering by not knowing the truth, So, you have that was growing, and Shannen actually directed that last episode. So it was all bittersweet. It was like a full circle, from beginning to end, and I got to do the whole season. I was in the back of my mind. I think it was very ego-driven and wanting to like put my thumbprint, my mark on the show, But it was like, hey, it's been a good year. We're moving on. So I lost a job. So I was a little sad. At the same time, it was like, was I not good enough? Was the character? And they were like, we're just growing the show. We got to keep moving. You played an integral part of the show this season, and we're moving on. And then later they had called me back, but I was on another show, and they were trying to bring me back for season 8. And so I believe it was maybe 6 or 8, one or the other. Holly remembers. And so I was excited. I was like, yeah, I want to do it. I was like going back for they were like, let's put in 8 episodes. And I was on another show, and unfortunately they would not let me out to do that. I think that Dan and Piper were going to have a child. I don't know if Drew was the child. There's always still questions whose child it is. Is it Leo or is it Dan's? So that is for the audience to decide. But I don't know. That's because I never got to make that happen. So I think they had to restructure this storyline and the way it was scripted. It would have made a new dynamic, and it could have carried on an extra few more seasons after that. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of people, but Holly and I, we always remain in touch, and Brian and I from time to time. And then I learned more about the show and the fan base, and then the global phenomenon that it carried, and how popular it was abroad. So I was excited to have been a part of something, but I didn't know the magnitude that it had become. And so when Holly and Brian and Drew and Shannen were all off doing, events and these conventions, I was like, I want to go. I was like, what happened to the threesome here? It was 3 girls, we were the threesome. You were a relationship for the show. So, but I kept poking the bear and saying, Holly, 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 and then they brought me on to their podcast, the House of Hollywell. And so from then, it just, I kept fueling the fire of like, okay, Holly, it's getting time. And then it was lovely to be invited to this one, because this is the first time that I've been abroad and represent the show. 100%. I thought, I remember when after the show concluded, I think they did like 180 episodes. And there was conversation, many years later, and then they decided, I think the original cast, they wanted to reboot it into a new generation and carry the tradition forward. And so I was like, oh, you got to bring me on this. You got it. But, I was already had done season 2, so I don't think they could find a character or a story that would fit appropriately, since I'd already been on the show and established. So, but it did not have the success, from my remembering the amount of success that the original girls had done. So I think it speaks volume to what they did and they brought to the show. I think they were a phenomenal cast. I think they were professional. They did their thing. They came in to work. Shannen was an exceptional talent as an actress, but as a director, she was really great. And the amount of people that I know that have come through the show that have evolved, I worked with many of them in other projects outside of that one show. So I have probably 4 or 5 of the members, the ensemble that's here today, that I was excited to reconnect and see again. So it's brought us all together in a different manner, but for a great manner, because there's just a huge audience out there who love Charmed.